So today's video is going to be on the subject of consignment notes. So if we just take a look at an Environment Agency consignment note. The first thing to note is that a note is needed for all movements of hazardous waste, and that includes collections from businesses, registered waste carriers, movements from one premises to the next. The only real exemptions are for the movement of domestic hazardous waste other than asbestos, and there are some exemptions around import and export of waste where there's a special different note to be filled out. So the layout, if we look at the layout of the note, the Environment Agency have quite handily give us an example of how a consignment note should be filled out, how it should be constructed. You're free to do your own, but it does have to contain all the information as dictated by the Environment Agency. So to complete the consignment note, we've got 5 parts: A to E, A, B, C, D and E. And if we look at parts A and B to begin with, parts A and B are to be completed by the producer or the holder of the waste, and it must be completed on all parts of the note. So there's different copies of the note. So part A on the producer's copy, the carrier's copy and the consignee's copy, and part A and part B must be completed by the producer or holder on each copy. So in part A, you must provide details of the origin and the destination of the waste in parts 1 to 4 of part A. So describe where the waste is coming from and where it will be taken to, and who produced the waste if it's different from where the waste was held. And also here you'll notice there's a consignment note code. So the consignment code should consist of 6 letters or numbers of the name of the company. So the first 6 letters or numbers of your company name should be completed. And then after the separator, the next digits should be numbers or letters which are unique and chosen by you. And if your company name has less than 6 letters or numbers, so if it was called ACE, for example, the remaining boxes should be filled with the letter Q, the character Q. And you should assign an additional letter at the end of the consignment note code for certain types of consignment. So, and this is this box here. If it's to be removed from ships, you should have the letter V. If the waste has been fly tipped and you're collecting, it should be F. And if the waste is being moved under a consignee return derogation, so it's been rejected, it should be under D. And in the unusual circumstance that the waste is a continuous piped waste, it should be P. So you've got some additional codes that don't come up that often, but you should be aware that there is a requirement to put them in part A. Okay, so we've gone through what should be in Part A, sections 1 to 4. Part B is where we start to describe the waste. And you must provide information about the waste, the activity that produces it, its composition, properties and packaging in Part B1 to 3. So if we just go through each stage. So B1 is to name the process giving rise to the waste. And you must provide a full written description and the standard industrial SIC code. That's a table that I'll provide a link for below. If you operate more than one process, this may be different to the SIC code for your main process. If the wastes on the note are produced by more than one process, use the SIC code and description of the process that's applicable for the waste that you want to move. And you may also use an equivalent NACE code instead. If we go down to B3 here, waste details. So for each different type of waste being collected, we need to enter some information. There must be a full description, and the short description from the list of wastes isn't normally sufficient. We need to identify an EWC code, that is the list of waste or the European Waste Catalogue, which is a 6-digit code. And again, I'll supply the link for the list of wastes below. We need a quantity. You must provide the total weight in kilograms for each list of waste code, and it must be accurate. We need to determine the chemical and biological components in the waste and their concentrations. So we need to describe the composition, including both hazardous and non-hazardous items. These will generally be listed in section 3 of a safety data sheet. We need to list the physical form, whether it's a gas, a liquid, a solid, a powder, a sludge or mixed, and we need to enter the one that best describes. And then we need to identify the hazard code, and we need to work this out and not omit properties the waste does possess, and obviously not include properties the waste doesn't possess. And finally, we need to use the code POP for any wastes that contain persistent organic pollutants. I'll provide a link for the waste classification guide so you can look those terms up. We need to determine and list the container type, number and size. So for example, 3 times 205 litre metal drums. And if a larger container contains smaller containers of different hazardous wastes, we need to list all the information for the smaller items. Moving down, we've got the transportation information, UN numbers, proper shipping names, UN classes, packing groups and special handling requirements. And we can get more information on this from the Health and Safety Executive. I'll provide a link to those documents. Now, in Part C, this is the section for the carrier to complete. The carrier should check Parts A and B and then complete C after the producer or holder has completed Parts A and B before the waste is taken away from site. And once the Part C has been signed, the copies go back to the consignor, the producer or holder, and you must, as a minimum, do a duty of care check to confirm the waste details are fully complete. And Part C shouldn't be completed if Part A and B aren't complete. And then if all that information's in place, Part D will be completed, where you certify that the information in A, B and C is complete and correct, and that the carrier is registered or exempt and was advised of the appropriate precautionary measures. You're signing a legal declaration to show that the waste is packaged and labelled correctly, and that the carrier has been advised of any special handling requirements. And there's also an additional requirement, which will be in a further video, where you're confirming that you've fulfilled your duty to apply the waste hierarchy as required by Regulation 12 of the Waste Regulations 2011. And we'll talk more about the waste hierarchy in future videos. But essentially, you need to make sure that you're effectively in the first instance not producing waste that you do not need to produce in the first place, or you've at least assessed to see if it can be recycled back into processes to help reduce the occurrence of waste. So you'll sign and complete the details of the producer of the waste, and you'll sign and date it. So now you've got a complete, and this will need to be completed on all three documents before it leaves site. And when all that's filled in, you've effectively got a record of where the waste is being collected from, where it's going to, what waste was collected, and what is the nature of the waste. Information for the haulier so that he can do his job properly. And then all parties signing and countersigning to agree on what was taken, when it was taken, the condition it was taken in, and where it was taken to. Until finally, so at that point, the waste will leave site and it will be taken to the receiving site where it will be checked, and this will be for the waste management company at the receiving end to complete. And I'll talk in further videos about what happens at the other end and what data you can expect to get back once the waste has been receipted. So if you have any questions, I'll leave an email below and a telephone number, and you can give us a call and ask us any questions.